Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel if you are new here. And by the title of this video, it's very different from what I normally put out there, just because I went to one of my favorite book author events. I had a couple things signed, which is so exciting. And I took several videos, which you will definitely see after this clip, so definitely enjoy that. And the author I saw was R.F.Kuang. She is the author of The Poppy War. If you have not read this or have not read Babel, definitely look into them. They're amazing. I cannot say more good things about this. And the author also, she is very sweet and funny. Very funny. I love that about her. So that's something definitely to check out, is these two books. Like I keep saying, I'm in the middle of this one, but I still went and got my copy signed because duh, why wouldn't I? And she loved that I have my little tab. She's like, I love this. It's like, ee! It's like, yes. And they also had the pre-order for Yellowface, like they will mention in the video. Cloud plate signed when you get the pre-order. Oh, so excited. And this one is signed. And of course, like I said, I got both of these signed, and we had to write a little sticky note with how we wanted her to sign it, so that was kind of fun and unique. So keeping that memory in my Poppy War book, because this is the first book I've ever read by her, and she's the first author event I ever went to as well. So look at that, it's signed. Oh, I'm obsessed. My heart's just happy. Okay, that was weird, but we're going with it. It was weird, but we're going with it. And as I got closer, I was more excited, and I was just like I had a question about Robin in this one, because I was wondering if the dad was actually the dad. I haven't gotten to that part yet, but all she told me is to keep reading. So we're gonna do that. But I just want to explain what this video was, and show you my little book signings that I got. And oh my gosh, it was so fun. If you get a chance to go, if she comes to your city, if you've read the books, go, definitely go, because it was worth it. Just, emotions are high and higher. So all right, that's all I basically have for today's video. So yep.
Year by Amazon, Kirkus Reviews, NPR, The Washington Post, and many more media outlets. Rebecca is a Marshall Scholar with a Master's of Philosophy in Chinese Studies from Cambridge University, and a Master of Science in Contemporary Chinese Studies from Oxford. She is currently pursuing her PhD in East Asian Languages and Literatures at Yale. Her fifth novel, Yellowface, comes out on May 16th and is already everywhere on Book Talk, Bookstagram, and in many publications. You can even pre-order it here from Beaverdale Books, and they do have signed book plates to put in your book when it comes. Now, please join me in welcoming Rebecca Kuang to the stage. So you have had an incredible year. The response to Babel has been amazing. I'd love to hear, where were you when you found out that Babel had debuted at #1 on the New York Times? And what has it been like to see readers around the world respond to the book?
Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having me. This is my first time in Des Moines and in Iowa, and I kind of, when my event agent brings me opportunities, I kind of make decisions based on places I've never been to before. So now I get to cross Iowa because I don't know if I would ever come back on the road. But it's been just so wonderful. The few hours I've been here, I got up at 3:30 this morning to catch a flight to Hartford, to Dallas. I had a nice breakfast and then to Dallas to here, and I went through the nice sculpture garden and was befuddled by the Ai Weiwei sculpture, and I'm here. And yeah, I'm so delighted to be with all of you. As for your question, so publishers know when a book is probably going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. None of my previous books.
The etymology in Babel. Will you ever write anything with a similar theme in the future? Or could you recommend any books with a similar language and etymology vibes?
Well, as I've already said, I don't like doing things twice, so no. But do recommendations if you like that kind of wordplay. And the first is fiction. It's called The Dictionary of Lost Words, I think by Williams. I hope that's right. But it's a fictional telling of the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary, and I think it's lovely. The second recommendation is a nonfiction book that's kind of like a fun counter read called Romaine Wasn't Built in a Day, and it's a book about food etymology and the history of words that we toss around in the kitchen all the time.
Fun. So, do you read fantasy in your own life? And then the second question on this one is, what is a recent book you've really loved?
I read tons of fantasy. I did struggle reading it for a few years in between writing the Copperword trilogy and finishing Babel, because I think when you're in a genre for a long time and you also have a lot of friends in the genre and everybody knows everybody, it's like you've seen too clearly how the sausage is made and how the sausage is no longer appetizing. So every time I read a fantasy novel, I was thinking like, oh, that sounds like something they changed in the second revision. Or I imagine like their editor told them to change this character arc because like this and that, and you can like kind of see the pieces moving, and you can appreciate when the pieces fit really well together. But with like hard-boiled mysteries, for example, or romance novels, like I can't really tell where the scenes are because I don't know the forms very well, so I can just have fun as a reader. But with fantasy novels, I'm like tracking, like how is this character being developed, like what information has been revealed, and it makes the books feel too predictable, and also with the editorial brain going off all the time and stuff, it's just not fun to read anymore. So I had to step away from it for a little bit, but now, since I haven't written a fantasy book in over a year now, I'm able to come back to the genre and just really have fun with it. As for a book I finished recently and loved, this is a debut novel. It's not fantasy. It's by Cecil Pinn. It's called Wandering Souls, and it's fiction, but it's clearly influenced by her own mother's experiences as a refugee of the Vietnam War. And the reason it's a debut novel, and you can see the themes and sometimes the structural things it's attempting don't quite work, but the strength of the story and the voice are just, it's so powerful that you can forget all of that and just be absorbed in the story. And the reason why it stuck with me is because I've spent a long time trying to figure out how to write about my own family's history and some of the very brutal, devastating things that my father went through, that my parents' families went through. And I wrote about them indirectly through the Poppy War, but I wasn't able to write a more direct autobiographical version because it felt like too close to the subject matter, and it felt like it would hurt too much to really get into that. And now that I've matured as a writer, and I think hopefully matured as a person, I am moving into figuring out how to chronicle what my family's been through, because as the generation who's survived to the end of it all, I want to document all of it, and I think that they deserve to have their stories memorialized. And spread, but I've been so afraid of it for so long, and Cecil Pin did that with her first novel, and it's so bold, and it's heartbreaking, and I can't even imagine the kind of difficult conversations she had with her mother as she was writing this book, but it really just amazed me, and I highly recommend it.
Sounds like a great read. So, back to Babel a little bit. What did your publishers think about your pitch for Babel, the specific paradoxical alchemy that's central to the story? Did they worry about its accessibility for readers?
So I don't really pitch novels anymore because, well, okay, I'll just explain how the Babel pitch meeting went. The Poppy War trilogy had wrapped up. Everybody was very happy with how it had done, and my publishers wanted to sign me on for 2 more books. And these were kind of like blank check deals, so they were going to sign me on no matter what, but they wanted to have a call with me just to see what was on my mind and to get some hint of what the book might be about. And there's a reason why my agent writes the jacket copy, because we got on the call and I was like, okay guys, here's what I'm thinking. Silver capitalism. And they were like, okay. And I was like, etymology. And they were like, And I was like, colonialism. In the 1830s. And they were like, is there a story here? And I was like, no, but. I think Oxford is a beautiful place. And there was like all these things floating around that was not a clearly commercial pitch. And I have to credit my editors with just kind of trusting me on this one and being like, okay, like go off into the pandemic, write your little book, we'll see what you come up with. And then I wrote this like 600-page monstrosity and I turned it in and I was like, they're gonna hate it, they're gonna hate it. And I think like people were really worried while we were talking through the first drafts over whether this would sell like 12 copies. And in part it's because I think that publishing regularly underestimates readers and underestimates like how nerdy readers are willing to get. And I remember a few months before Babel came out, I got this very backhanded review from like Goodreads or something that was like, it's fine, it will be fun for nerds of sufficient intensity. And I was like, do you mean I'm gonna sell 2 copies? Like, what do you mean? And then it turns out there are lots of nerds of sufficient intensity. So now when my publishers and I talk about what the next project will be, and I just like spit stuff like logic paradoxes and hell and Gödel's incompleteness theorem, they're like, okay, we'll trust you on this. Come back when there's a draft ready and we'll talk. But I do think coming back to MIT department parties, I think the sexiest thing in the world is listening to somebody who's really passionate about a topic just go on and on about that topic. Like, that enthusiasm is contagious. When somebody wants to tell you about something they think is really cool, you want to learn. And I have spent my career just jumping down rabbit holes that I think are fun and interesting. And at this point, I just trust that there will be at least one other reader who wants to jump down rabbit holes with me.
So this reader is interested in how many languages you speak, and have you visited all of the sites you write about in Babel?
Definitely not all the sites in Babel, lots of them. As for my languages, I have English and Chinese and Japanese, and I decided at the start of this year that at the end of the year I would be fluent in French. And that's probably fine. I can read it a lot better than I can speak it. But I was talking to a friend last night and I kept I didn't know the word for lemonade or lemons because Duolingo hadn't taught me the word for lemons. There's limons. She's like, do you mean citron? Like as in citron tarts? So that felt for me, but French is really fun.
So this person is a labor organizer, and they love the inclusion of labor and strikes in Babel. Did you play with multiple outcomes for the strike without spoiling anything? And does it mirror possibilities in modern academia? And I'm going to add a little bit. I know you were involved some with the HarperCollins strike this winter. Yes, this winter.
I won't talk about alternate possible endings for the book because I realize I just can't do this without spoiling the ending. But as for strikes in academia and strikes generally, I think it's always been like one central problem, and it's how do you convince everybody to hold hands and jump at once. And I think it's easier now to get the messaging out and to build that solidarity. Like, it feels frivolous to talk about it this way, but I think there is something exceptional about a moment where TikToks will go viral with like 16-year-olds being like, you know, if you're not pro the union, then I don't want to have anything to do with you. Like, the power that teenagers making fun of people and shaming people, that's unprecedented. Like, and they've like brought down global brands doing this. And so you shouldn't discount like the power of the current moment of social media to really add power to labor organizing that I don't think was there in like the 80s. As for publishing strikes, I don't know how many people in this room know about this, but HarperCollins in the US has the only union among the big 5 publishers, and they went on strike in November, and it was a very, very long strike. And we kept saying like the only way out is through, right? Because it was going to be a watershed moment no matter what happened. And if the strike had been broken, if they'd given up, if they all left publishing, I think that would have been a death knell for publishing, because that was like really the last line of a lot of accelerating trends that are making publishing worse at every level. I mean, people complain about not seeing a diversity of books in bookstores, or seeing the same kind of novel being pitched to them over and over again, and not getting new types of stories, new experiences. And that all comes down to, it's the same editors in the room, and the people in the room making those choices aren't changing. And the reason why new blood isn't coming into publishing is because it's impossible to live in New York on the entry-level salaries that publishers are offering. So like, things have to change on so many levels for publishing to get better, for the people in the industry, for writers, for readers. And the strike was like really like the last wall keeping it all together. I don't think the strike was a resounding victory, but it worked, right? And they got some of what they asked for. And I think the best possible thing that could come out of this is for Penguin Random House to unionize. So they should hurry up on that. But I mean, there's so many moments while the strike was going on where it seems like it was over, like Uptop was never going to budge, they're never going to come back and talk to them. They tried to starve them out during the holidays, and then, I mean, it just, by the end, the losses for HarperCollins, the PR hit, the fact that, again, so many teens on TikTok were refusing to review or buy HarperCollins titles because they were in support of the strike. Like, cumulatively, all of that did make a difference. And it wasn't perfectly executed, and they didn't get everything they asked for, but they won, right? The strike was not broken, and there was a pay increase, and it's an encouraging first step to what unionizing and publishing can do for the future. In part because the way he thinks about language and the way that he moves through the world is just how I move through the world. I'm trying to figure out how to talk about the last act without spoiling. I think when you think about everything that's going on and think about our complicity in systems that are brutal and coercive and exploitative, I think a very popular response among like people as privileged as we are to be sitting here is to kind of opt out and to get depressed about it, right? You read, I've been reading a lot of reports of like climate change depression, or like suicidal depression brought on by the idea of global apocalypse, because, you know, people just get so nervous and frustrated about what's coming and feel like they're completely powerless to stop it. And these are valid responses. I've felt very depressed about the state of the world. But the mistake that the main character, Robin, makes over and over again in Babel is he thinks that if he just punishes himself, and if he can offer himself up as a martyr, and if he leans into what his depression is calling for him to do, then that is kind of making amends for the privilege he's offered. And one of the responses by his friends is, no, that's the coward's way out, right? You can't just opt out because you're one of the few people in a position where you could do something about this. So Robin's response comes naturally to me, but I think it's the wrong one, and I don't know how to talk about this more without spoiling it.
Sounds good. This one is about translation. So what are your thoughts on the power of translation to validate hybrid languages like Chinglish, and if this is something you want to do in future works?
I haven't worked very much with Chinglish. You know what it does though? The Oscar award-winning film, Everything Everywhere All at Once. You know, I haven't thought very much about translation in hybrid languages. So I would just recommend watching that film. I did write a review of it where I talked about what it means for Asian American representation and what it's doing linguistically, and that's on R.F.Kuang and pretty easy to find, so more defined thoughts there, but, and this is less about translation and more about like linguistic self-determination, and another one of the arguments that the text is making. Take for example the language Haitian Creole, which started as a hybrid language, but now is a fully fledged language with its own rules and vernaculars, etc. And is in no way less sophisticated or has any less breadth of description than French does, and it's been discriminated against for so long as being a worse version of French. And this is the struggle that the character Victoire goes through throughout Babel. She's always asking, well, I also have Haitian Creole, like, does this count as a language of specialty? And the faculty at Babel keep telling her, no, it doesn't, because it's just a hybrid language, and it's not a language that has its own rules. It's not a literary language, and that's clearly false. And anyone who takes some time to look at the structured Creole and to study the history of it and to look at literature written in it knows this. So yeah, I mean, there's so many languages that have been discounted as being inferior or barbaric or inarticulate, and part of the argument of Babel is that they're just different ways of moving through the world, and they have value, and just because it doesn't sound like your Frenchman's French doesn't mean it's not a beautiful language worth studying.
Awesome. Okay, so this one looks like it's from a college student. What first got you into writing, and what's your advice for a young college student looking to start writing?
I don't know if it's you and I who were chatting about when I started writing earlier just now, but somebody did ask me, when did you start writing? And I feel like that's an impossible question to answer, because it's like, when did you start breathing? When did you start drawing? And I think I've always just written impulsively since I could write. I just really enjoy the act of putting words down on a page and kind of trapping thoughts and experiences and producing a text version of them. So, if that's you, then right? Like, if you have no interest in writing, maybe you'll develop one later on, but it's just this impulse, and if you have to express it, then you have to. As for advice on how to turn that impulse into a professional career, though, there's so much advice out there over like what classes you should take or like what major you should take, etc. And I don't think any of that advice is generally applicable. But I have settled on a piece of advice that I think works for everybody, and it is read as broadly as you can and try to read outside of English. If you have a language that isn't English, read in that language. If you only have English, then read in translation and find the good translation. And the reason why is because if you're only reading in English and only reading within the genre that you want to publish in, then you're just going to sound like everybody else. But the best novelists innovate with language and break it and do cool and interesting things with it. And you can really only do that if you're thinking outside of English for a little bit. So when I read in Chinese, I'm encountering different spatial metaphors, different imagery, different vernacular, and this sticks in my mind, this way of moving through the world. And then when I come back to English and reach for those images and describe it, that makes my English very different from somebody who doesn't have Chinese. And the best translators, if you don't have another language, are also breaking language in interesting ways that you can learn from and adopt and absorb into your toolbox. So read in translation. If you want a starter recommendation, I was at a bookstore in Oxford over winter break and I asked what books are really flying off the shelves right now, and he said translated Japanese novels about cats. That's a very specific answer. It's a very popular niche genre. And I read the translated version of She and Her Cat recently, and I think it's gorgeous, and I think the way it's translated and what it's doing with English is also just wonderful.
Okay, so collaboration between authors and cover designers can vary. So this person is curious about your personal experience. How much input did you have in the design of your book covers? Do you have a favorite cover? I know we were talking about the Polish cover upstairs because you're headed to Poland tomorrow, but what's your favorite cover?
Yeah, tomorrow night I will be in the sky, and then on Saturday I'll be in Warsaw. But as for cover art, it's been very different for each of the books. When you're a debut author, every interaction with your publisher feels terrifying, and you're constantly afraid of making people angry or coming off like a diva, or my fear was constantly that they would just decide my book wasn't worth the effort and not publish it. So when we were in cover conversations about the Poppy War, I was very afraid to express my reservations, and this is how we ended up with the light-skinned version of Rin holding a bow and arrow, which is not the weapon she uses throughout the trilogy. And the rendering of her gets a little bit more accurate throughout the trilogy. But I've always had my reservation about those illustrations. I think they're gorgeous, it's not her. By the time we got to Babel, I figured out a couple of things. The first was that I was now more confident in asserting what was working and what wasn't, and standing up to my publisher. And the second was that I'm not a graphic designer and I'm not an artist, and the kind of feedback I can offer the artist or the design team should not be very specific visions for a cover that I've drafted, but rather general like vibes or inspirations for them to take and kind of run with. So all I said about Babel was I want it to be bold and interesting and kind of timeless, and I want there to be birds. There have to be birds. And so they found this incredible artist who does these very finely detailed ink drawings that look like Victorian woodcuts, and they just gave him a vague description of the tower, and he came up with that tower illustration, which I think is perfect. And I didn't tell them, I want a mostly dark cover with a tower. I was just like vaguely Victorian and cool and weird and silver. And I think, because it's not my art form, the best thing you can do is find an artist you trust and really let them run with it, and that's what we did with Babel, and I'm in love with this cover, and I love every version of it. There was a whole system in place, but basically your sales reps are talking with the New York Times people, and your publicist is keeping an eye on pre-orders and how sales are moving, and also tracking like what the worst performing book on the list the previous week you have to clear. So everyone was fairly confident that we were going to be somewhere on the list, and we thought maybe near the bottom because it's a fantasy novel, and fantasy novels usually aren't massive bestsellers. And it's always the Wednesday after the book comes out. So say the book comes out on like Tuesday the 16th, and you find out on Wednesday at 8 to 16 I hope that's right. And so I had left the US at that point. I was in New York for the UK tour, and my fiance kept giggling because he was with me and he likes to make dumb jokes. He was like, we're in New York, we're in Old York, and we're going to find out about New York. 5 hours ahead, and the New York Times list goes out to publishers at 5 p.m. and gets published online at 7 p.m. So my team was like, after you're done with your York event, come back, we're going to have a Microsoft Teams meeting at 10 p.m. And I was like, okay. And then I got on the call, and it was all glitchy, and I couldn't hear them well at first. And then my editor said, well, Becky, we didn't hit the list in the way that we thought we would, and my heart just plummeted. And he came out with, you're at the top. And then they were screaming and crying. I didn't know that
Alright, you guys, if you have watched the end of the video, thank you for watching. It was very fun going to this event and, like I said, getting my books signed. So I'm going to let you go ahead and leave a comment down below if you will, or if you want. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss further videos from me. Smash that like button as always. And turn on your notifications for whenever I post new videos, so that's always fun. And I will hopefully see you in another video very soon. Bye, guys.